Wendy Feinberg here from the award-winning Jefferson Documentary Series. No worse for the wear, just a little longer hair. Welcome to the second of our quarantine quartet Q&A. I hope you enjoyed this very entertaining, soulful Sidemen long road to glory. Now I would like to introduce Scott Rosenbaum, the director of this amazing film, and Scott Sharrard, former lead guitarist and band leader for the Gregg Allman Band, who is now making a name for himself as a solo artist. Our moderator will be Tom Needham, the very talented interviewer from the Sounds of Film on WUSB Radio. Take it away, Tom, Scott, and Scott.
Thanks, Wendy. Hey guys, it's good to see both of you again, Scott and Scott. I had this opportunity to speak to the two of you the last time this film showed in the festival. And before we get into talking about the movie again, I thought I'd start off by asking the two of you how each of you are doing in terms of the coronavirus, both personally as well as professionally.
Sure. Well, thank you all for having us and for screening Sidemen in this way, in this unique time. It's fantastic to be able to share the film again. It is a crazy time. I mean, everybody, it's hard to even think back to just a few years ago when we showed the film live, how different the world was, and now how we have to adapt here as we are in this virtual Q&A and streaming films online, but doing the best we can to adapt to this new reality.
And Scott?
Yeah, thanks for having us today, guys. And I mean, anything that involves Scott Rosenbaum, I jump at the chance to be involved. We're kind of brothers of the road in a way from the last few years. We've done some fun stuff together. As far as, this time, I mean, as a musician who supports his family with playing music in this conversation, I'm in sort of the entertainment hospitality by default industry. So our whole paradigm, got just blown to pieces. Because, quickly we all realized that the only place we're making any money is on the gigs. And of course the gigs are, in the case of doing clubs, the waiters and the chefs and the porters and everyone who works there and the venue owners. And so it's a really difficult time to be a musician, but it also opens up, you've always got to have the best you can, have the philosophy that, one door closes and another opens. So I'm trying to stay on that path as much as I can.
Well, one of the things I like about this movie is that it kind of emphasizes the idea that you never know what life is going to bring you. These guys that are featured in the film had lots of ups and lots of downs. And I was wondering, when you take a look at this movie, are there any lessons that you've learned from these guys that you're applying to your own lives right now?
Well, for me, for sure, they left me with a lot of lessons, having had the good fortune to spend several years with them over the course of this film and my prior film. Sidemen, it's sort of well documented at this point. It took me 8 years to make the film, and it was a very difficult 8 years, and many trials and tribulations and moments where I thought the film was never going to be seen, that the concept was dead. And it was easy to get down because, I had invested a lot of time and energy and money in making it happen. But when I'd get down, I would think about those three men and, the lessons that they had shared with me. And, I'm worried about 5, 6, 7, 8 years of a filmmaking process. And these guys were 5, 6, 7, 8 decades in the music business, just struggling really right up to the end. I mean, they certainly had high points, but life as a sideman is difficult. So for me, the takeaway from them that I, will always think of is, in difficult times like this, in difficult times in production or trying to make a film, really what those gentlemen went through and how they persevered.
Yeah, I mean, my my role, I guess, in the film that you'll see is talking about me knowing these three guys as part of what was the live music scene in Milwaukee and Chicago in the early 90s, on which I was this punk teenager who was obsessed with blues and soul and R&B and jazz. And, you know, those guys, you know, Pine Top, Willie, Hubert, they mentored our whole scene. I got to jam with all three of them. I got to work with Willie a couple times at, you know, he used to host a jam session at Coco Taylor's in Chicago. And, you know, when I used to play with him there at the jam, and it'd be 5 people there, 2 of them would be sitting in, you know, and here's the guy who played on, you know, here's one of the people who gave birth to rock and roll. So that was, you know, I learned very early on hanging out with these older guys that, it was going to be a lot of ups and downs. And, you know, I was saying to my wife a couple months ago when we retreated to Woodstock, to my mother-in-law's house from the city, because we live in New York City in Harlem. I said to her, I said, you know, I feel much worse for other people because we've lived day to day ready for the bottom to fall out. All these years we've been together 20 years, and we're really good at the bottom falling out and picking ourselves up. And I think that's because my music career has floated the boat most of the time for us. And I just echo everything Scott says. And I'm just so, as a fan and someone who loves these 3 individuals and mentors so deeply, I'm so grateful that Scott Rosenbaum came along and spent several years with them. I mean, my contact with them was only 2 or 3 years. When they were down and out, but as a teenager and a musician and as mentors, it made a life-changing interaction with all 3 of them. So I'm just really grateful that the film exists.
Yeah, me too. You know, maybe the 2 of you can update our audiences a bit. It's been quite some time since you've been here on Long Island showing the film, and I'm sure there were many more screenings since then and things that happened with this movie that maybe all of us don't know about, or maybe that happened with your music career that we don't know about. What have you guys been up to the last, you know, couple of years that the audience might find interesting since this last screened?
Well, the trajectory of the film really, since the time we screened at the Port Jefferson Doc series, I guess it was 2017, we had a terrific theatrical run. That was handled by Abramarama, who's made probably many films that you folks have shown, because they really are one of the tops in music documentaries. So we had a great experience in theaters. Probably 80, 90 cities showed the film. And then certainly other festivals, and now it lives online. So, you know, that was a great experience getting that out there. Since then, and you know, you folks showed a film that I just completed in a film called Life and Larry Brown, about a blues musician that I encountered here on Long Island. I made that film over the last year and a half, and timely and sad as it is, the main subject of that film, that the Larry Brown figure, just passed away as a result of the coronavirus. So kind of surreal in that Sidemen took me 8 years to make. Just through a chance meeting, I met Larry Brown, made that film in a little over a year, and so much happened in that time, and right up until 2 weeks ago when he passed away. So I guess that question sort of is germane to the strangeness of our times, and particularly so for me in terms of this particular film. This is the last film that I've worked on.
Wow. And you, Scott?
Well, I've been cranking away. You know, I toured all over the world with my band, and I've been working on my 6th solo record for a couple of years now. We've had just some amazing shows, and really been cranking it out. But back in November, I ended up, my favorite band of all time is Little Feat, and my hero is Lil George, and I subbed for Paul Barrere to gig in Long Island, actually, last November, turned out to be the day that the great Paul Barrere, who I was subbing for, passed away, and I've now joined the band. So I'm kind of on round 2 of the bliss of 13-year-old Scott Sharrard. I mean, I had the decade run with Gregg Allman, and my other band was the Allman Brothers. I could never decide in the end which band I love more, but Lowell George was someone that I really connected to as a singer, songwriter, and guitar player. And now to be hanging with these guys. We did a week in Jamaica with Los Lobos as guests, who's another just phenomenal, huge influence on me. And it's just been incredible. So we're going to do a bunch of content with Little Feat. We're trying to figure out how to get it done. We were supposed to do a tour this summer, a big tour, and kind of relaunch the band, but that obviously is shelved. So in the meantime, we're doing some digital stuff, but I'm on yet another round of hanging with my heroes and just having a blast, man. I love these guys, and I've been talking to them all regularly during this time. So that's kind of what's next for me.
Well, that's great. Scott, you mentioned before that your part in the film is that you spent a lot of time with the guys in the movie when you were younger. You must have a million stories. Can you share with us something personal from your experience with these guys that maybe didn't make it into the movie?
It's been so long since I've seen it. I forgot what made it into the film that I talk about. But I mean, with each, I'd say Hubert, just being a guitarist, Hubert, had a really big impact on our scene. And the time I spent with him jamming on stage and mostly hanging backstage at the Up and Under, which was on Brady Street, which was that was the laboratory of the scene. That's where Luther Allison would hang out. Pine Top came in there a couple times. The first time I met Pine Top was at Summerfest. I played, he came and played on a set with a band I was in at that time. And this is all in my mid-teens. But Hubert, he used to show me how to finger pick. He taught me his style of finger picking. I used to ask him to show me, that solo on Hidden Charms, and I got him to show me that in the dressing room. Willie Smith was doing that jam session at Coco's. I was in a band with this guy Ron Hill, who was a great Chicago blues bassist, and he used to play with Willie all the time. Ron played with Magic Sam back in the 60s and stuff, and Ron brought me down and put me with Willie, and Willie, just that shuffle, man. I mean, it was just that groove. The only other person I've ever played with who could sound anything like Willie or Sam Lay was Levon Helm. And when Levon would play a shuffle or some of those different train beats, it reminded me so much of those two. And of course, that tickled Levon when I brought that up, and he knew those guys. But it always comes back to those guys, the subjects of the film. Spending all this time with Gregg Allman on the bus, living with him on a bus for almost a decade and at his house, we'd listen to all kinds of music, but it would always come back to the blues for all of us. And when you'd hear those Wolf or those Muddy records come on, and I'd hear those guys, and just see someone like Gregg Allman sit there in his chair and just that look on his face and just look at each other and go, we're never going to be this good, are we? There's something about what those guys invented. I mean, they really poured the foundation for rock and roll, and they elevated American roots music to this place where it opened up all the possibilities for every generation of musician that's followed them. I think there's no way to overstate how important they are.
And Scott, you did a great job of speaking to so many legends in this film, and they all seem to have similar feelings. That they all seem to really respect and love these guys. what was your experience in talking to all of them? Were there any similarities to what you found when you got to talk to them about these guys?
Oh, very, very much so. And right in line with what Scott shared about listening to the blues with Gregg. I mean, for me, when they all passed away and the nature of the film changed from more of a concert film, which really, there's so much about what we're talking about here that is interwoven. For instance, The Last Waltz was my first exposure to the blues as a kid. I had an uncle who loved the band, played drums, turned me on to drums. Levon was a hero. Watched The Last Waltz, and out comes Muddy Waters. And that was my first awareness of the blues. Just to really be able to have the experience with these guys and hear these stories firsthand, it was mind-blowing, and it really was a thing that to me said that this needs to be preserved now, because I think all of us here sort of geek out on the backstory of the blues. I just wondered how many more people were aware of these connections, and would they find it interesting. And that was really my intent in making the film, because I always read the back of the vinyl records and was aware of who played on what song, and of course the rich history of Chess Records and its impact on all the rock and roll that I grew up with. So yeah, overall it's just an incredible experience sitting with these guys and hearing my rock heroes, whether it's Gregg Allman or Bonnie Raitt, talk about these men and the history of the music from such a place of reverence. It was almost like, talking to a kid watching Gregg talk about Pine and Hubert and Willie. And that was, fantastic to see, because I think they were all, Scott included, probably thrilled to be asked about a subject other than themselves for a change. And then to be able to talk about these people they revered so much. It was great. And I think it comes through in the interviews throughout the film, and hopefully conveys the justification for the reverence that everyone has for these largely unsung musicians.
It's interesting. You mentioned The Last Waltz, and I think the last time we talked about how The Last Waltz was the original sort of inspiration in terms of what you were attempting to do with this movie. It's funny because Scott just mentioned Levon, and here at the Port Jefferson Documentary Series, they just showed Once Were Brothers. It's amazing the band seems to be such an important group, obviously, and not just in music but in film. It always seems to be like the group that people go back to. How has the band influenced you in terms of a filmmaker, and also maybe Scott, you could talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, I could point directly to The Last Waltz. As a kid, to be turned on to that by my uncle, to see the entire breadth of American music represented in all of these artists, which was the intent of The Last Waltz as the celebration of their final show. All of that has just affected me in terms of my education of where music was, and again, to go backwards into the blues, and all those artists at the time that I was in love with, the British Invasion. I see Clapton and even Ronnie Wood get up there at the end, and the Beatles. All of it is interconnected, and that was really the underpinning of what led to my first film, The Perfect Age of Rock and Roll, that these blues men cameoed in, and then by extension, Sidemen, is just my fascination with the history and how all of these different stories, and in the case of the blues, the mythology, has woven its way into all of popular music.
Absolutely. The question about the band in film, I think The Last Waltz, and I'm sure Scott would agree with me, is like the greatest concert film of all time in rock and roll. The energy is just so palpable. And every performance is sort of like, it's like the best, that film has the best of what you get from a gig with multiple artists, where each artist is upping the energy, but not trying to outdo someone else. There's a sense of a family that's just woven into the sound, into the visual, and it's not something you can really plan. I think the band was planting those seeds as they came together. And I think the real reason we still listen to the band's music, their songs, they're playing, and it has so much impact, is the fact that they, Levon was from Turkey Scratch, Arkansas. He was on the King Biscuit radio show when he was a kid. That's one aspect of the band. But then the rest of the Canadian members of the band, they spent all that time with Ronnie Hawkins, and they spent all their time studying Muddy Waters and the Staple Singers. And, they cut their teeth playing these 6-hour gigs, playing with Ronnie Hawkins, playing blues and rock and roll. And Richard Manuel would sing Ray Charles songs, and they were rehearsing when they weren't playing for all those years they were together. And I think a lot of bands, especially now, that you see those beautiful Elliot Landy photographs of the band with those incredible outfits, and I know at the time it's like they had short hair, and it was like they were kind of anti-hippie, I think, when they came out a little bit, to by and large, maybe not here in Woodstock, but in the rest of the world. And I think that a lot of bands now, they try to maybe affect some of the image and the sonics of the band, but you can't replace that knowledge of rhythm and blues and gospel that they had. And part of that was these groups from these Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf records and so on, and so many other sessions from Chess that these three subjects of this film embody. So I think it's all tied together in the end.
Maybe not as important as the band, but maybe just as important in terms of popularizing blues music to the mainstream are the Blues Brothers, who are briefly seen in this movie. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the Blues Brothers and its part in this movie.
Sure. Well, I mean, I was thrilled to be able to interview John Landis about that. And he keyed me into a lot of stuff behind the scenes that I hadn't known as a fan of the Blues Brothers movie. But certainly, Belushi and Aykroyd were blues fans, particularly Aykroyd, who then turned Belushi onto the blues. And he had blues clubs in Canada. And then I think they opened the joint in Manhattan when they all went to Saturday Night Live. They do after hours performances with a lot of great bluesmen. As their star was on the rise, they took the opportunity to, as Landis says in the interview, to focus their considerable star power on the blues, for the very reasons I think that we all feel compelled to do that in our art, whether it's film or music, is to just continue to, as is often said, keep the blues alive. I don't love that phrase because it feels like the music's on life support in some fashion, but it does need a shot in the arm with every new generation, and the Blues Brothers certainly did that. And Aykroyd and Landis' script was terrific, and became a real pop cultural icon. And in the process, similar to what I've done with Perfect Age, and of course with Sidemen, they featured Pine Top and Willie. And as Landis had told me, I didn't realize that originally the scene where you see John Lee Hooker playing on Maxwell Street with the Muddy Waters Band behind them, in our case, Pine Top and Willie are featured. That was done because Muddy Waters got sick the day that they were supposed to record it, and they were going to do two songs, one with John Lee Hooker solo and Muddy Waters and his band. It was interesting to find out that pairing was a result of Muddy getting the flu, and you have John Lee Hooker playing Boom Boom on Maxwell Street with the Muddy Waters Band. And I just thought that was such a cultural event that not many people were aware that those guys were sitting there behind John Lee Hooker playing. It was just another example in the film of them sort of being at ground zero for a tremendous event in blues history, certainly one that popularized blues again in the late 70s, early 80s. And just not many people are aware of their contribution.
Yeah, pretty cool. Scott, do you have anything else to add about the Blues Brothers, or?
I mean, I loved the movie when I was a kid. You know, it's hysterical. I mean, more than anything, it's hysterical. I love you know, James Brown's performance in it, the John Lee Hooker.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely had an effect on me. Actually, the documentary film that I saw, there were two that I saw when I was around the age of 10 that made me play music. Was Hail Hail Rock and Roll, the one about Chuck Berry,
Right.
and then I saw the Monterey Pop Film Festival documentary, which was like a whole afternoon thing. My parents took me to a movie theater and I saw it, and Hendrix and Otis Redding at that. That was lights out for me.
Yeah. I think
But
a
yeah,
lot of people
Blues
are
Brothers was funny.
Yeah. Uh, I'm sure a lot of people are interested in the two of you, your relationship. Can you give us a sense of how you two became friends and the stuff that you've done together?
Sure. Well, it all goes back to Sidemen. We were introduced through, I think it was your then manager,
Yep.
Scott. We were in the process of
Howard Swimmer.
Yeah, we were in the process of trying to figure out, this is in the early days after those three men passed away in 2011, how we were going to move forward and reshape the film. And once we realized we couldn't get the performances, duets ultimately, that we had originally set out to do, Last Waltz style, where all the musicians would come out and play with the guys on stage, while we captured some of that, and that's in the film. We realized that interviews were going to be the thing, to reach out to different musicians to get perspective on why those three guys were so important. Scott and I were introduced, and we did an interview at the Gibson showroom in Manhattan for the film, and you know, hit it off. And from there, we've done several things together, many of them around Scott's solo work. I'll let you pick up on some of that, those great experiences that we've had.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had it specifically when I recorded the Saving Grace record. Basically, you know, Scott basically joined the band for a week, and we had this sort of, the whole record was this kind of spiritual experience of like recording at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals with David Hood and Spooner Oldham, and having Dwayne Allman's 57 Gold Top guitar there. And then the second half of the week, we went to Memphis and cut a bunch of tracks with the original High Rhythm section, who are a whole nother potential film in the waiting, Scott. I see you have your Memphis Music shirt on, so I'll take that as a sign.
Yeah.
But, you know, Howard Grimes and the Hodges brothers are still out there just playing their tails off, and they're still playing on tons of records, by the way. I've sent a bunch of friends down since then. But that was kind of I felt like that was like a real, you know, for a couple guys, you know, from the North, essentially, that was a pretty unbelievable sort of like baptism in all the music we love, like in the place with the guys, sort of all over again, I guess, for both of us. And I mean, Scott, you must have, you know, a hard drive full of.
I do. I was just looking at it. Yeah, I produced.
It's unbelievable.
A couple of sort of short making of docs of that trip for both studios. Of course, Fame Records in Muscle Shoals was the first half, as Scott said, and then the Memphis recording sessions. And just incredible. I mean, you just reminded me, I mean, of course, watching you record the record is incredible, but then to sit with those guys, the Swampers in Fame, and then the High Rhythm guys, and I have it on tape. I have to send you the clips, but for them to be, they just broke into a version of Let's Stay Together live in the studio for us as we watched them play it. I mean, the hair stands on the back of my neck just thinking of it. It was incredible week, as you described, Scott.
That's
we've got more to do too. So I got to talk to this guy about some other stuff. But we're not done yet.
Well, you guys have had a long journey together yourselves, and this film has been seen by a lot of people, and I'm sure you've had a lot of amazing experiences making it as well as screening it. As you look back, are there any memories that the two of you have that really kind of stand out as special memories for you?
As it pertains to the film and the release?
Either making it or screening it. Anything that's happened as a result of making this movie.
I mean, again, in the process, I kicked and screamed because it was a long, painful 8 years,
Yeah.
which is not unique to me as a filmmaker. I think many documentary filmmakers takes forever, but I wouldn't trade that for anything, because the experiences of getting to meet and spend time with those three guys. I mean, countless stories that didn't make the film. I mean, sitting in the hotel room with Hubert at 4 a.m. after a shoot, because he just loved to stay up, and have him sit there and picking away on Wolf classics in front of me just for me. I mean, it's
Right.
priceless. I mean, worth the price of admission for the whole 8 years. But getting to, you know, form relationships with musicians like Scott, invaluable. I mean, dream come true kind of thing.
That's great. And you, Scott?
Yeah, I think this film, you know, obviously, I mean, you can tell from talking to Scott here that, like, it's not just that he's articulate, it's that he actually has a real passion for music. And as you know, I've made documentary projects and video projects with a bunch of different artists and different directors, and like when I said Scott just fits into the band, he does. It's like he's in the band when he's working with musicians as a filmmaker. And that I think is really what, when you watch this film and you watch the final cut of it, that's really what you're seeing, is Scott's passion and integrity to protect the music. And I've always said, if you take care of the music, it'll take care of you. And I only surround myself with people and collaborate with people who live by that ethos in some respect. And I think the end product of this film is you have a capsule. You have this film that's a capsule that really can be shown not only to fans so that they understand what they're really listening to when they listen to the Rolling Stones or the Allman Brothers or any of these bands, but for me personally as a musician and a singer-songwriter, I think it's really important for musicians, younger musicians especially, to see this movie and understand, like, when you play any form of American music, if you can't play blues, you can't play any of it. And these are some of the architects of how a rhythm section works. You know, when they were in there cutting these songs at Chess, they were figuring out how electric guitars and bass and drums went together. And they were figuring out how to electrify rhythms from the Delta. And they were figuring out, you know, well, what if the bass does this or the guitar does that? And that became the blueprint for how music was played going forward. And I think that this movie has the guts to tell the story, to tell the real story.
Well, luckily, we can watch a movie like this at a time like this when people can see live music. If I can ask you one more question, what do you think is going to be the effect on the culture right now with people unable to see live music? There's been a lot written about that right now. Is it not that big a deal, or do you think it's actually, for audiences, for society, is it a big thing that people can't go out and experience music together in public?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, this experiment that we're all undertaking in order to do what is right and what is necessary for these incredible, you know, they call them essential workers. I mean, we've got to find a better term for these people who are working in hospitals and even warehouses and butcher shops and stuff. I mean, it's like music is like so far from my mind right now in terms of what's essential in terms of it as a business, because I think that's
Right.
really the question you're asking, you know. So we're the last thing that comes back, you know. But I will tell you that the genre of American roots music that I play, I guess when I play it, you call it rock and roll. I mean, it's really, American roots music to me is a mix of country, bluegrass, soul, you know, all the stuff we love that's from America, but, you know, all mixed up together, you know, and that's with the blues as the bass line. And for that music, where you're playing electric guitars with bass and drums and singing and playing live on the floor and playing shows, the only place to make any money is at the shows. You know, we're not social media influencers. We're not Kardashians. You know, we're not Justin Biebers. We're musicians, and there's nothing, and there was little to nothing for these guys. And there was also little to nothing for Willie Dixon, who wrote the songs, right? Remember Gregg Allman told me a story one time in the 70s. He went to meet Willie Dixon, and he ended up getting driven in his limo to a housing project in Chicago in Cabrini Green to a 2-bedroom apartment. So how does the guy who writes all the songs that make Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones famous end up living in a, basically low-income housing in Chicago in the 70s?
Oh.
While these guys are flying around on private planes. So there's a certain aspect where it's always kind of been like this. But then, the fact is that on the other side of this, the only hope I have in this is that our industry will realize that just doing the gigs as a revenue stream is not enough to support an art form. And maybe something will come out of this to support artists who play American roots music. I don't know. But I can tell you everyone is, what I've done is I've been teaching online on and off for years. So I'm just doing a bunch of that now, and I'm doing really well with it. I mean, my friends who only play gigs and do sessions are in terrible shape. And I'm trying to help them any way I can. And there's Music Cares has an amazing program right now. If anyone watching wants to support Music Cares, run by the Grammys, by the Grammy Foundation and the Recording Academy. So if you go to, I think it's recordingacademy.com/musiccares, you can donate. And they have a COVID-19 relief fund for musicians, and it's doing great. They've given out a lot of checks, and they're helping people out a lot. So for now, that's all we can do. And then, go on social media and like and comment and watch streams and do whatever you can, but it's going to be tough.
Thanks, Scott. And Scott, how do you think this is going to affect just the fans in terms of not being able to go out and listen to live music?
Well, I mean, so much can be speculated as to what the fallout from this will be, and certainly how long it will take until we get back to some semblance of business as usual as it pertains to live entertainment, even going to see movies. So I don't really know, but I have one sort of modest hope, and that is that when we do get back to that place, that people have a greater appreciation for the shared experience of a live gig at a club or sitting in a movie theater and watching a film with other people. I think we've certainly taken that for granted a little bit, or a lot, as it pertains to everyone having, a big screen TV in their house or choosing to stay home. Now that we're forced to stay home, perhaps there's, again, a renewed appreciation for what it means to get out, because that'll support artists like Scott in their touring and live performance, and even me and my Weekend Warrior garage band when we play a local club here on Long Island, or go out to see movies. Things like that, I hope, are held on to, the appreciation for what we've lost right now once we come out of this.
Well, guys, I want to thank you again for joining me in this Q&A, and I want to wish you both continued success. I can't wait to hear about Little Feat and, Scott, your next movie, and hopefully we can all get together again in the future.
Absolutely.
Really
Thank you, guys. Thanks for everything.
All right, back to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Tom, and our two Scotts for the very engaging, informative Q&A. Join us next Monday for our screening of the film, The New Normal, which revisits another new normal we have been faced with in the recent past. Also, if you are watching this Q&A on May 11th, before 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and have further questions, you may join us for our first ever live Zoom Q&A in just a few minutes. Either way, please take care and be safe until we meet again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. Good seeing you again.